The Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. First order of business is we have a few new members of the committee that I'd like to announce and congratulate. First one, Representative Ryan Zinke's not here. Oh well, that's one strike. Delegate James Moylan of Guam, congratulations, sir. And a guy that we've known for a while who's come back to Congress, Representative Fume from Maryland. I don't see him. Is he here? No. Okay. That's two strikes. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the Biden administration's policies towards the Western Hemisphere with a special focus on great power competition. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As this committee continues to examine the growing malign influence of our adversaries around the world and the American response to it, it is essential that we assess the nature and extent of the risks that we are facing in our own hemisphere. Under the Biden administration, China, Russia, and Iran have bolstered their presence in the region. They have cornered critical mineral markets, expanded their military footprint, and deepen their intelligence capabilities, all aided and abetted by many authoritarian regimes in the Americas. As we speak, 4 Russian warships, including a nuclear-powered submarine and a frigate carrying hypersonic missiles, are set to arrive in Cuba. China is bankrolling the dictatorship in Nicaragua, and Iran is looking to station Quds forces in Venezuela. China is infiltrating countries in Latin America and successfully pressuring nations that once recognized Taiwan, only to abandon their support. CCP has invested billions in infrastructure and critical minerals throughout the hemisphere. For example, China maintains ports on both sides of the Panama Canal and is heavily invested in mining operations in Latin America. Additionally, they have many more commercial officers than we do at their embassies working deals and have targeted PR campaigns that undermine American interest. Congress has given the president tools to combat and compete with the great powers. It has authorized the DFC, appropriated bilateral economic assistance, and provided funding through the CHIPS Act, which I authored and passed into law to secure our supply chains. It has mandated corruption sanctions against foreign officials and their family members. And yet the Biden administration has not effectively used all the tools that Congress has provided. The result is a hemisphere more and more aligned with our adversaries. On illegal immigration, we are seeing the mass waves of illegal immigrants at our southern border and the flow of deadly drugs like fentanyl into our country. I've worked on border issues for 25 years, both as a federal prosecutor and as a deputy attorney general for the state of Texas, and as a former chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. But I've never seen this border more broken. We had addressed this problem with the migrant protection protocols, otherwise known as Remain in Mexico. But one of the first actions of this administration was to rescind it. One stroke of the pen wiped away 4 years of progress. In fact, just yesterday, it was reported that 8 foreign nationals from Tajikistan were arrested in America. They came across the southern border and were, quote, vetted and allowed to remain in the country. They are believed to have ties to ISIS-K. Securing our border is a national security priority. That's why in January, I went down to Mexico to talk to then candidate Claudia Sheinbaum about ways to work together on fentanyl and immigration. I congratulate her on her election. I hope she takes seriously the immigration issue and fentanyl. Today is an opportunity, though, to evaluate the administration's work and assess the next steps. Our adversaries cannot be separated. They are all connected and they're all working together. We can't win the game if we're not on the field competing. I want to thank our three witnesses for being here today. And in the great power competition in our hemisphere, I believe that America is falling behind. I want to be more optimistic, and hopefully our witnesses today will give us better news than I have prognosticated. But that's the way I see it. And with that, I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking our three witnesses, Assistant Secretaries Nichols and Robinson, and Acting Assistant Administrator Camilleri, for joining us today. And I know all in the work, and especially of Assistant Secretary Nichols and Robinson, who I've worked with for a long period of time on the Western Hemisphere, and know of your expertise, your dedication, and your focus, and I want to thank you for your service and everything that you do. This is the first full committee hearing on the Western Hemisphere this year, and your insight today will be invaluable as work to address the many challenges we face with our closest neighbors. As the Biden administration made clear in its national security strategy, no region impacts the United States more directly than the Western Hemisphere. After all, this region includes the United States' top 2 trading partners, Mexico and Canada, as well as 10 other U.S. free trade agreement partners. And given how interconnected our economies are, and given our shared borders and our cultural ties, what impacts one nation impacts all nations throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. And shared values and shared challenges require collective efforts to deliver a better, more prosperous future. They require collaboration and dialogue and finding common ground wherever possible to address issues like irregular migration, drug trafficking, violence, and the cascading effects of climate change. And I, for one, strongly believe that such efforts require strong U.S. leadership, which can only be accomplished by ensuring nations in our region see us as a reliable partner. We risk eroding that trust, however, if we frame our interests in the region through the prism of a great power competition, as today's hearing title has been framed. We must be clear that the United States recognizes investment and inclusive development in the region as mutually advantageous for us and our partners. Those investments must match our values, which is why the administration's approach combines a focus on labor and environmental standards, human rights, and inclusive growth. That is what sets the United States approach apart from the People's Republic of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which seeks to exert greater control through predatory lending practices that leave countries indebted to Beijing. This approach is also what allows us to be seen as a partner of choice to both outcompete the PRC and deliver better outcomes for our neighbors in this region. Initiatives like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which is working to mobilize $600 billion for quality and sustainable infrastructure development. The $3 billion identified by the Development Finance Corporation and the Inter-American Development Bank for infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere. And the Central American Forward Initiative, which has catalyzed $4.2 billion in programming along with friend-shoring efforts, are examples of this administration's efforts to increase investments and growth of our partnerships and with our partners in the region. However, these investments are far from enough to serve as an alternative to the investments made by Beijing, and it is up to us in the United States Congress to do more. And while Democrats successfully negotiated to remove the steepest of cuts proposed by Republicans to our fiscal 24 state and foreign operations budget, the final negotiated budget still included many cuts that hurt our diplomatic and development programs. For F-25, Republicans are again seeking to cut SFOPs, this time by 11%. This is not only irresponsible, but also entirely contradictory to my Republican colleagues' claimed objective to outcompeting China. We are not going to win a so-called great power competition on a small power budget. Underscoring this point is yet another self-inflicted setback. Republicans have continued to hold up already allocated funding, $94 million for the multinational security support mission to Haiti, a country further devolving into lawlessness as a result of horrific violence, including systemic sexual violence perpetrated by gangs. The MSS is key to promoting stability as Haitians work to restore democratic governance in their country. And this delay of funds risks preventing other nations from investing as they wait to see what we do. We must understand that Haiti's crises will be ours too when it spills over into the region at our border. Twice now, Republicans have kowtowed to former President Donald Trump and torpedoed immigration reform bills that would have made the largest investments in decades to address irregular migration at our border. And the America First or America Only policy advocated by the former president has and will again isolate America and create a vacuum that our competitors will rush to fill. What is needed is continued U.S. leadership, as President Biden has demonstrated time and again, deepening our involvement in existing multilateral institutions in our hemisphere and working as partners to governments in the hemisphere to address our collective challenges. We've already seen and seeing results of that engagement. Antigua, Barbuda, and 24 other states of the Organization of American States joined together to condemn Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine this past February. Trinidad and Tobago, the Bahamas, Jamaica, and the Dominican Republic are among several Caribbean countries working to support clean energy project development and investment in broader climate goals through the administration's U.S.-Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis. And finally, nearly 2 years ago, the Biden administration launched the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection with 20 leaders from across the Western Hemisphere to support integration, lawful immigration pathways to the U.S., and humane immigration enforcement. Just last month, Colombia announced it would grant temporary protected status and employment authorization to 600,000 additional Venezuelans inside its country, adding to the 2.3 million Venezuelans already in Colombia. And I look forward to hearing more about that today. So with that, Mr. Chairman, let's work together and let's lead in the Western Hemisphere. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I appreciate the spirit and passion of my ranking member and good friend, and we will work together, as we always do. It's just too important not to. And this is probably the last bipartisan committee left on the Hill, to be honest with you. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, and we're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us. Ambassador Brian Nichols is the Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere Affairs of the Department of State. Ambassador Todd Robinson is the Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at the Department of State. And finally, Mr. Michael Camilleri is the Acting Assistant Administrator, Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Thank you for being here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record. And I now recognize Assistant Secretary Nichols for his opening statement.
Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The Western Hemisphere has become a focal point in great power competition again, with the PRC and Russia vying for influence throughout the region. Addressing this challenge requires close coordination with interagency colleagues, international organizations, and our allies and partners around the world. As Secretary Blinken has said, our strategic competition with the PRC represents one of the defining challenges of our time. We also remain vigilant as Russia seeks to expand its influence in the Western Hemisphere through malicious cyber activities, disinformation campaigns, and security force projection. To manage these global challenges, we are bringing together a more integrated, inclusive, and competitive region underpinned by a network of partnerships that can shape the free, open, secure, and prosperous vision for the world. Through revitalizing long-standing partnerships and institutions and building new, fit-for-purpose coalitions, we are working side by side with our partners to address irregular migration, insecurity, the climate crisis, and inequality. Managing great power competition in the Western Hemisphere requires strengthening democratic institutions, reducing corruption, helping our partners build economies that attract more investment from the U.S., businesses, and trusted partners, and ensuring governments can be more responsive to the needs and aspirations of their citizens. Economic engagement with the Americas represents a critical pillar of our great power competition strategy. The United States is the top trading partner for over 2/3 of the hemisphere's countries. We have invested over $1 trillion in the region. In 2022, U.S. goods traded within the hemisphere totaled to $1.9 trillion. To unlock the region's economic potential and ensure democracies deliver the prosperity their citizens demand, last year, President Biden, together with 11 partners across the Americas, launched the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity. The partnership represents 90% of the Western Hemisphere's GDP and nearly 2/3 of its people. The initiative's goal is to make the Americas the most economically competitive region in the world. As part of the partnership, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation and the Inter-American Development Bank launched an investment platform that has already identified $3 billion in potential infrastructure projects across our hemisphere. We work together under the partnership to reinvigorate our region's economies, build resilient supply chains, and invest in our workers, our infrastructure, and our strategic industries, including clean energy, critical minerals, and semiconductors. Last year, Intel announced plans to invest $1.2 billion to expand its semiconductor operations in Costa Rica. In April, Panama employed International Technology Security and Innovation Fund to sign a semiconductor research development agreement with Arizona University. The United States also organized the first Americas Partnership Semiconductor Workforce Symposium, and in April, Secretary Yellen and the President of the Inter-American Development Bank convened a conversation on attracting the billions of dollars needed to build out the semiconductor and other supply chains. I strongly support a capital increase for IDB Invest. The President's budget for fiscal year 2025, the administration has requested authorization for the United States' full subscription and appropriation of $75 million as the first payment. A reinforced IDB Invest will deliver on key U.S. objectives for the region of bolstering private sector-led growth, building resilient supply chains, creating economic opportunity for migrant populations, and offering a transparent and accountable alternative to PRC bilateral lending in the region. As we pursue a strategy of invest, align, and compete with the PRC in the Americas, we are also actively working to address Russia's destabilizing presence. Moscow seeks to expand its influence in the region through malicious cyber activities, disinformation campaigns, security force projection, which is why the United States sanctioned the Russian Interior Ministry's training center in Nicaragua on May 15th. Russia's training enabled the Nicaraguan regime's brutal repression against its own people. Russia will conduct heightened naval and air activity in our hemisphere. Russia will temporarily send combat naval vessels to the region. These ships will conduct port calls in Cuba and possibly Venezuela. There may also be some aircraft deployments in the region. These actions will culminate in a global Russian naval exercise this fall. In Cuba, we remain concerned about Kremlin and PRC attempts to shape the nature of Cuba's future. Greater U.S. support for Cuba's private sector remains vital to counter Russia and the PRC's malign influence in Cuba. Promotion of private enterprise is just one of U.S. engagement in Cuba. We consistently advocate for respect for Cubans' fundamental freedoms and press for the release of political prisoners. We have supported Haiti's call for safety and security and pledged $300 million to support the multinational security support mission. We have rallied more than 20 nations to pledge some $100 million in additional financial contributions as well as personnel. The restoration of democracy in Venezuela also remains at the center of our efforts. We continue to harness all diplomatic tools and leverage sanctions to this end, including with Venezuelans and regional international partners, to encourage Maduro and his representatives to hold competitive and inclusive elections. Finally, we are leveraging partnerships to address irregular migration under the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration Protection, which 22 countries in our region have endorsed. We have reaffirmed our shared responsibility to respond to migration and displacement across the hemisphere. This means reinforcing our own borders, opening new lawful pathways, and encouraging our partners in the region to do the same. Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary, and I appreciate your efforts on supply chain on semiconductor chips into this hemisphere. And out of, I just recently came back from Taiwan, which is very much in the bullseye of the PRC. I now recognize Ambassador Robinson for his opening statement.
Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss states' engagement in the Western Hemisphere in this moment of great power competition. In this hemisphere, we are faced with interrelated challenges. Corruption, insecurity, mis- and disinformation, weak institutions, and lack of economic opportunities have dimmed the perception of democracy and the rule of law to many people in the region. Particularly, the PRC and Russia seek to capitalize on these factors to increase their competitive presence in the hemisphere to compete against the United States. In response, INL works with partners in the region to promote rules-based international policies and standards. The threat from malign external actors is constantly evolving and requires additional creative and innovative thinking. Non-state transnational criminal organizations exploit weak rule of law, utilizing global networks and technology to diversify and grow their criminal activity. Countering the flow of illicit synthetic drugs by TCOs and the precursor chemicals used to produce them is an administration priority. Combating the production and trafficking of fentanyl and other drugs is critical to safeguard American lives and deprive TCOs of their profits. Synthetic opioids alone took the lives of more than 70,000 Americans in 2023. By depriving TCOs of their ability to operate and expanding access to life-saving treatment and overdose reversal mediation, we can reverse this trend. Through training, equipment, and technical assistance, along with bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, INL is working to counter the flow of illicit drugs into the United States by building our partners' capacity to disrupt the ability of TCOs to produce, traffic, and profit from these deadly substances. Enduring security cooperation with Mexico is critical to the success of our efforts to combat the fentanyl crisis and criminal networks that profit. And throughout Central America, INL supports specialized units and efforts to strengthen interdiction capacity, including by fostering interagency coordination through technical assistance, training and mentoring, and providing critical equipment. Through the Global Coalition to Address Synthetic Drug Threats, the United States leads the global response to the public health and security threats posed by synthetic drugs, with 29 of the 156 participating countries from the Western Hemisphere alone. While we direct our focus towards fentanyl, we do not ignore other counter-narcotics challenges driving increased violence and instability in the hemisphere, primarily those related to cocaine and other plant-based narcotics. Our approach has evolved to address the full spectrum of forces that enable cocaine production and trafficking. Transnational organized crime remains a top concern for partner governments in the hemisphere and poses national security threats to the United States. TCOs are utilizing global networks and technology to diversify and expand activities, and there is demand for their services, especially from our global competitors. INL works tirelessly to bolster the rule of law and judicial capacities of our partners throughout the Western Hemisphere as they often serve as the critical defenders of democracy and against malign actors. We combat endemic corruption and impunity by strengthening institutions and the capacity of partner nations to better identify, dismantle, and prosecute the main drivers of corruption. Corruption provides a foothold for the influence of malign actors, and our adversaries weaponize corruption to drive a wedge between us and our partners. Corruption in the Western Hemisphere is a roadblock to the equitable society and economic development and a key national security threat. Throughout justice sector programming with judges, police, and prosecutors, through this, INL supports Western Hemisphere partners to protect and serve communities through the delivery of impartial and equitable administration of law. INL also focuses on reform of judicial institutions and supports regional partners to implement obligations under international standards, benchmarks, and treaties. And finally, INL promotes anti-corruption priorities in the Western Hemisphere through multilateral engagement. Transnational criminal organizations and corruption in the Western Hemisphere are deeply rooted challenges that embolden and empower our global competitors. To outcompete these actors and counter their detrimental impact on citizen security, economic prosperity, and democracy in our region, we must continue to support our partners where possible and pursue innovative solutions. While these issues pose a serious threat to regional stability and our own national security, INL is and will continue to be committed to advancing a just and secure future in our hemisphere. Thank you for your attention on this important issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now recognize Mr. Camilleri for his opening statement.
Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to discuss USAID's approach in Latin America and the Caribbean, which reflects the region's pressing needs and the reality that the choices we make there make a direct impact here at home. USAID is responding to the region's emergencies, political challenges and opportunities, and historic levels of migration in a way that enhances hemispheric stability and builds local capacity to address challenges. That not only helps advance our foreign policy priorities, but provides a clear contrast to the approach of the PRC. Our stance as a rules-based partner, not a transactional lender, gives us a competitive advantage and our partners the ability to make choices free from coercion. While net approval for PRC leadership has declined by more than 25 percentage points over the last 2 decades, the U.S. continues to be the preferred partner to address national and hemispheric challenges. That includes showing up in moments of need, including responding to recent floods in Brazil and fires in Chile and Colombia. Last year, USAID provided more than $527 million in emergency response to the region, including food assistance and support for subsistence farmers in Central America affected by El Nino, and food, water, sanitation, hygiene, and health assistance for people affected by the political and economic crises in Venezuela and Haiti. So far this year, USAID has provided $105 million for the humanitarian response in Haiti, helping our partners provide life-saving assistance to more than 1.5 million people. While we work to address the immediate and urgent in Haiti, USAID also continues to invest in the long term by operating the majority of our programs. We're improving food security and have helped 105,000 farmers increase product yields. We're meeting health needs by operating 92% of our 170 USAID-supported clinics despite gang violence. And we're addressing citizen security with community-based programming. But one of the strongest signals of long-term support the United States could send would be renewing Hope Help trade preferences for Haiti's textile industry, a backbone of its economy. Lasting progress requires development, security, and political stability. To that end, USAID has joined interagency efforts to build support for the MSS and is prepared to provide technical assistance to the Transitional Presidential Council in Haiti. Our work in Haiti reflects our drive to advance democratic values across the Americas. The region is home to autocratic outliers like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, where USAID works to support people who demand democratic change and human rights. In countries where we see dangerous erosion by leaders consolidating power, we support civil society, independent media, and transparency. And we show the region that democracies deliver by capitalizing on bright spots and surging our efforts when citizens take a chance on reformers. That's what we're doing in the Dominican Republic, in Ecuador, and now in Guatemala, where USAID is helping President Arevalo's team ensure that citizens who bet on democracy feel its dividends. We have seen how non-democratic rule in one country can impact the entire hemisphere. 7.7 million people have fled Venezuela in search of freedom and opportunity. Nearly 85% of them have relocated within the region. So we've supported the generous regularization and integration policies of our partner countries, helping Colombia provide legal residency to 2 million migrants, supporting degree validation in Peru, and backing integration efforts in Brazil and Ecuador. These integration efforts deter onward migration while helping grow the host country's labor force, tax base, and economy. We've also worked with the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to decrease irregular migration by nearly tripling access to H-2 visas. This helps American companies fill critical labor gaps and gives workers access to lawful, ethical employment opportunities that reduce the demand for irregular migration. But treating the symptoms alone is not enough. Under the Biden administration's root causes strategy, USAID's programming is boosting sales and employment for small businesses, increasing farmer productivity and food security, improving education and vocational training, and supporting anti-corruption reformers. While we cannot claim direct causality, 2023 data shows a sustained double-digit decline in intentions to migrate from Guatemala and Honduras since the strategy launched in 2021. USAID's work reflects our commitment to get the greatest possible return on our investments, whether that means leveraging our programs to encourage effective policies, bringing in private sector and other partners who can take our dollars further, or using our programming to build the capacity of local partners so that they can sustain progress beyond our programs. At this pivotal moment for our hemisphere, the administration's commitment to investing in people and partnerships across Latin America and the Caribbean positions USAID to improve lives and fortify democratic institutions, strengthening our standing in the region and our national security. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. I have a map that I want to hopefully put up if our technology works here, but this is it. It's not good news. I mean, since this administration took power, we've lost to our adversaries. Brazil, October 2022. Colombia, May 2022. Chile, December 2021. Honduras, November 2021. And if you look at the map, there aren't many friends down there. Got Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, and now with the recent election in Argentina, we need moral clarity and authority in our hemisphere. When you lose that, you lose to your foreign adversaries, like China, particularly. Illegal immigration gets worse, not better. Fentanyls are coming into this country. It's worse, not better. China's malign influence gets worse, not better. Cartels and their operations have gotten worse, not better. And it's all tied together. Our adversaries are all working against us. We don't choose them, they choose us. And we have this debate on Ukraine, but now we have it in our own backyard, in our hemisphere. More countries recognize China than Taiwan in our hemisphere, and the Belt and Road projects keep coming and expanding. I think we need a new doctrine for our hemisphere, one that protects our interests, combats our enemies, and promotes shared prosperity between us and our allies. And I'm not saying this to score political points. I just want to know, what is the plan? That's reality. What is our plan to address these threats in our own backyard? Mr. Secretary Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We work with countries across the political spectrum as long as they respect democracy, the right of voters to choose their own governments. The characterization that you make on some of the governments, I would disagree with respectfully. In Chile, President Boric has repeatedly condemned human rights violations and the lack of democracy in Venezuela, and continues to speak out boldly against the repression in Nicaragua. Peru, President Boluarte and her government have been very supportive of our efforts to bring greater democracy to Venezuela, to address the challenges in Nicaragua. They have raised deep concerns about the presence of Chinese investments in infrastructure, and I think we'll probably talk about that
like
some
the
more
Panama
today.
Canal is a good example. I mean, Roosevelt created it, and then Jimmy Carter gave it back, and now you have two Chinese ports on both sides of the Panama Canal.
Panama's a strong U.S. ally.
And they are. That's good, right?
We look forward to an excellent relationship with incoming President Jose Raul Molino, and we think he will be an excellent partner. And he's already stressed in his conversations with our embassy his commitment to working with us.
Mr. Meeks and I will be having a delegation to Latin America, and I look forward to working with you before we do that. Ambassador Robinson, 2 points. I was in Mexico with the Secretary of the Navy. We passed this year, there is new screening that can detect fentanyls and precursors, technology. And I talked to the Secretary of the Navy down in Mexico. They're very interested in getting this technology deployed, especially to the 2 ports on the Pacific side, where all the precursors are coming in from China. Can you give me an update on that?
Thank you for that question. We are working regularly with our Mexican counterparts, particularly the Navy, at the port of Manzanillo, and I can't remember the name of the other port. We regularly have contact with them. We regularly review the type of equipment and training they need, including canines, which have been incredibly
And that's great.
useful.
I brought up canines with them. They said they would need like thousands of canines to do this. The technology is now available, and I think we need to get it to them, right?
Well, absolutely. What I would say though is, unlike some of our competitors, we can't direct American companies to go to point X or point Y. They're going to go where they can make money. We can certainly expose them to our partners in Mexico and allow them to have conversations with the government.
Well, I
of
talked to the
Mexico.
Secretary of the Navy in Mexico, and they're very interested. I think if this is a matter of cost, they certainly would, would want to buy it, but I think we could also assist them
Absolutely.
in that effort. And I would appreciate if you could update me on this, because our appropriations process is going forward. I think that would be a really wise investment.
Absolutely.
If we're going to protect our children from the scourge of fentanyls. Lastly, Ambassador Robinson, I talked to the AMLO, President of Mexico, and, there's a choke point, and it's between, Guatemala and Mexico. There's also the Darien Gap. It would make a lot of sense to me, and I've been doing this for a long time, this border stuff. I think Remain in Mexico is working, but your administration did away with that. But, I think there's interest on Mexico's part. I think Panama has an interest in the Darien Gap to close this choke point off, where you're not talking about 2,000 miles of border. You're talking about a very finite number of miles that we could secure to stop this illegal immigration that's happening. And then that sends a message of deterrence that the cartels understand. I mean, do you have any thoughts on those two ideas?
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you. In fact, we are working very closely on both sides of the Darien with Colombia and Panama, both getting them to work together and allowing us to assist them in monitoring the area, getting their forces to the area. Our INL airframes are assisting in getting their officers to the area. We would welcome Mexican support in this effort. I think you're absolutely right that making sure that we're working with all of our partners in the region closely, and we are, can go a long way towards addressing this issue.
I look forward to working with you, and I'm going to talk to our appropriators, because we talk a lot about border security around here, but when you got two obvious checkpoint, sort of choke points from a geographical standpoint, to me it's just common sense.
I would add Guatemala as well.
And Guatemala
in that group.
Guatemala and Mexico and the Darien Gap. I think those two combined would make a whole lot of sense, and I think that would be bipartisan, But I'm not going to speak for Mr. Meeks. I will yield to him and recognize him.
No, I do think that could be bipartisan. But, let me just say this. I just believe that we cannot address our shared challenges if we just retreat behind our borders and, we want to talk about outcompeting China. We can't outcompete China or Russia or curb their influence throughout the hemisphere if we drastically cut U.S. diplomatic and development budgets. There's a way why diplomacy is important and what we need to do in our investments. And that would also help with immigration, illegal immigration coming across, because people are leaving certain places looking for a better life because of what's taking place there. And that the United States have to play a role in that. And we can't build the trust that we need to build and sustain partnerships with our partners in regions if the engagement is seen solely as guided by our interest in competition with the PRC, because it says that we don't really care about them. We're just caring about stopping the PRC. And I have been engaged in the Western Hemisphere for most of my congressional career. And when I look at what's taking place down there, particularly when you look at places like Colombia and Brazil and Peru, and I look at some of the things that are taking place there in Central America, the Caribbean, there's issues of whether or not, because what I do see in those things with those governments, with the exception recently of Venezuela primarily, but many of these other countries are democratically elected presidents that the people's voices are crying out for help in certain areas and are looking toward the United States to see where we are. And I know that the president has certain policy priorities that he is putting forward so that we can try to address some of those issues in various parts. So my first question would be then, give us the strategic importance and what are the Biden administration's top policy priorities in Latin America and the Caribbean that addresses some of the concerns that I've just articulated and some of the concerns that we see in some of the countries that are our neighbors and our partners in Central America, in South America, and in the Caribbean.
Maybe I'll kick it off, Ranking Member Meeks, and thank you for your decades of leadership on these issues. We are working as hard as we can to promote a more secure, democratic, and prosperous region. That means delivering support for our allies when they need it. I'll give you the example of Ecuador, where President Noboa has faced tremendous economic, transnational crime and security challenges. We have brought to bear a full array of solutions there. My learned colleagues have traveled to Ecuador to support them on security and development issues. We're working through international financial institutions to provide relief to the crushing debt load that country faces, and we seek to help them become more capable in dealing with the challenges they face. We need to see greater investment from U.S. and like-minded nation private sector players in the region, even though we are the leading trading partner for 2/3 of the countries in our region. IDB Invest can be an important leverage in that effort. I would also note doing things to help countries join the supply chain for electric vehicles and using critical minerals which are abundant in our region, and making sure that U.S. companies have access to those and work with partners so that everyone benefits along the supply chain. XIM is a crucial partner for us in that regard. I think I mentioned already DFC. Those are all key tools that we have, and we need to be present. We need our diplomats on the field. We need ambassadors in every embassy. We need commercial officers. We need foreign agricultural service officers out there competing every single day, because our competitors have their people on the field working to compete.
Let me ask this real quick, and because there's two areas I want to deal. I help, and I want to know how has the Bureau of Western Hemisphere empowered the Office of the Special Representative for, one of the things that I've worked hard to get down was the racial equity and justice to advance the U.S.-Brazilian Joint Action Plan to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination, as well as we worked together to promote the U.S.-Colombian Action Plan for Racial and Ethnic Equality, CAPRI, and to address closing civic space for marginalized communities, because in a lot of these countries, these communities are marginalized. Also across the hemisphere, including Nicaragua and Venezuela and Honduras and Peru. So tell me, how is that, the office, the Bureau is doing to advance that and work in that, and can you do it without any money?
Well, it's a tremendous priority for me. Working with Desiree Cormier-Smith and Esred has been incredibly important. We have traveled together to Brazil to hold meetings on our JPR, our Joint Action Plan to eliminate racial discrimination. There, we have a comprehensive interagency approach on those issues in Brazil, and we look forward to receiving our Brazilian counterparts later this year to build on the conversations that we had both in Brazil and here in Washington earlier this spring.
Lastly, and I know we got votes coming up, but this is Mr. McCall and I are working closely together. I know he's going to have another meeting later this week, because I'm very concerned about what's taking place in Haiti. And what that deal is and the money that is there. We're working very closely together. He has agreed that we're going to, but tell us, where are we, with reference to this new piece that we can get this thing done, and how important is the getting that money that's needed for the security therein?
It's vital, sir. We're making progress on the political side in Haiti. We now have a new prime minister in Haiti. A new cabinet has just been gazetted. It's a group of technocratic experts. Kenyan delegation has visited. They're ready to go. They need us to make sure that we have the things that they need in place. The funding that we seek will allow us to provide crucial things like vehicles, fuel, ammunition, radios, other communication devices. This will be an important partnership with not just Kenya, but a number of countries, Jamaica, Bahamas, others from around the region that will support this effort. The Haitian National Police needs our help to be able to deal with the gang challenges. Every day, Haitians and others are at tremendous risk. We saw the tragic murders of 2 American missionaries last month, and we can't let more people die while we wait to deploy.
And thank you for that. I have a briefing on Thursday. I just wanted to have assurances that the money and weapons will not end up in the wrong hands. We have a history of doing that as a nation, and it's a legitimate concern, but I don't want a failed state in the region either that can be exploited by our adversaries. So with that, I recognize Ms. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to get this in before we run to votes, and thank you all our witnesses for their service and their time. This administration's waffling has created chaos and instability on a massive scale, from Europe to the Middle East and beyond. We've got Russia, China, and Iran are taking advantage of our weakness and our lack of resolve. Every day, they are bringing the fight closer to our shores, and whether through the utter collapse of security on the southern border or the out-of-control flow, as Mr. Meeks has brought up, of fentanyl into American communities. We must restore American leadership abroad to deter China and Russian aggression, but we cannot neglect the vigilant defense of our interests in our own backyards. Assistant Secretary Nichols, this year so far, 27,000 Chinese nationals have been apprehended at our southern border. A total of 89 of them have been removed from the U.S. In 2024. Last year, 24,000 Chinese migrants illegally entered the U.S., and only 285 were sent back. Why are the deportation numbers so low, and what is your assessment of the national security risk posed by these growing numbers of unvetted Chinese nationals illegally entering our country?
The Biden administration is committed to secure borders.
No, they're not. 10 million illegal migrants have come across, so don't say that to me, but go ahead.
This administration proposed comprehensive migration reform. That was not passed. The president has put forward new regulations that will expedite the removal of those persons found not to have the ability
Tell me about the Chinese
illegally.
nationals, 50,000 in the last 2 years.
We have worked with partners throughout the hemisphere as part of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection to impose new visa restrictions on a number of nationalities throughout the world who are entering the Americas. We have worked with partners to facilitate the repatriation of those persons who do not have.
Why are
the right to
Chinese
be in.
nationals coming here?
Maybe because China doesn't have much hope or prosperity for them. Maybe they're trying to leave.
Well,
China.
that's not doesn't come under the definition of asylum. All right, let me go move on. It's very disturbing, and do not at all tell me or this committee that this administration, this president, has not let in over 7 to 8 million illegal migrants since he took office, and millions more in gotaways. Over 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2023, mostly due to fentanyl. And so far, this fiscal year, over 9,600 pounds of fentanyl have been seized at the southern border, enough to kill around 2 billion people. In April, the Bipartisan Select Committee on CCP released a comprehensive and damning report finding that China directly subsidizes and incentivizes the manufacturing and trafficking of fentanyl materials and other synthetic narcotics. Assistant Secretary Robinson, what is your assessment of China's role in the fentanyl crisis?
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. First, let me say that since we have reinvigorated the Counter-Narcotics Working Group, I've had 4 opportunities, 2 in Beijing, to speak to my PRC counterparts on this issue. They know that this is important to us. And they have taken some initial actions, notifying their chemical industry, for instance, about certain substances that should not be distributed to the United States. But they also know directly from me and from the secretary that they're not doing enough. And
yeah, 9,600 pounds. I mean, that's, as I said, enough to kill 2 billion people, and #1 killer of 18 to 34-year-olds in the United States of America. This is a war on our youth. 100,000 Americans died in 2023. I'm going to move on here. Assistant Secretary Nichols, last year, Brazilian President Lula da Silva allowed 2 of Iran's most advanced warships to dock in Rio de Janeiro. The Lula government granted these ships access to one of Brazil's most important ports despite U.S. sanctions and over the reported objections of the administration. What specific actions has the administration taken against the port in Rio de Janeiro and where the ships docked and the Brazilian companies that provided them services or accepted payments, and the foreign companies that have entangled themselves with the port or those Brazilian companies since?
We have discussed with countries around the region the importance of respect for the sanctions against Iran and its forces. We have raised the issue with the government of Brazil.
Two of Iran's most advanced warships docked there. What specific action did we take?
We have raised this issue with Brazilian officials and expressed our
All right,
concerns.
we've done nothing. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Delay yields back. Committee will recess for 3 votes on the House floor, and we will reconvene after these votes. Thank you so much.
Committee will reconvene. Chair now recognizes Mr. Keating for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our witnesses today. Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela all support Russia's malign influence in Latin America. They also prop up, doing so, Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Mexico and Brazil certainly could do more. Given the fact that Russia now, their domestic products less than 1.8 trillion, compare that to California, it's about half of California's domestic product. We have events in Russia economically, including Putin doing a whole new set of income taxes, steep income taxes on his people, 5% corporation tax hike, new mineral extraction taxes. Their illegal war has resulted in cutting them off from supplying 25% of Europe's oil, 40% of their gas. They are certainly hurting economically. Given that, and looking at the long-range trajectory of their economy, given the fact that their security and military efforts have been exposed, their weakness has been exposed by Ukraine, if you look at all those things, do you see that in any way that these countries looking forward, seeing Russia's obvious weakness militarily in Ukraine, seeing what they're doing economically, how poorly they're doing, that this alignment with Russia could be something that we could change? And could you comment on that? To me, those countries in the short run can certainly take advantage of the security issues, perhaps, with the Wagner Group and other groups. But even mid-range, looking at a forecast, the trajectory of their alliance with Russia doesn't seem to be one that makes sense for their own self-interest. Is there an opportunity there for the U.S. to try and come in and intervene? And what do you think those countries might be looking at Russia today?
Thank you, sir. The opportunity for us is to prevent a positive vision for cooperation with partners across the hemisphere, to demonstrate that working with the United States is in their interest, to show them that if it's a matter of security cooperation, there's no nation that has more to bring to bear than the United States to support them. We look forward to working, for example, with Ecuador and Peru to help them transition to more U.S. Equipment. We're very pleased that Argentina has bought 24 F-16s, increasing their interoperability with the United States. But that's going to mean a presence and putting forward a positive vision and including through speedier delivery of foreign military sales and greater agility in our foreign military financing.
Yeah, do you forecast or see them reevaluating the position even absent the U.S. intervention? It's something I think is just common sense.
Well, the specific countries that you named, I think this will depend on progress toward democracy in those countries. The primary North Star for Ortega and Murillo in Nicaragua or Maduro in Venezuela is maintaining themselves in power and finding partners that will overlook their glaring abuses.
And I think the other thing is with China's activity economically too, you see in African countries right now the remorse that so many of those countries have dealing with China's predatory loans and the promises. Countries that are doing business with them, they'll take their raw materials, they'll use it for their own business, and there'll be slight profits to the country, the home country. That's opposed to a model with the U.S. and the West that would mean the investment would stay in that country, and the profits would be greater in that country, and the employment would be greater in that country than the Chinese model that's there. So I hope, as we look at these countries, that there's an opportunity. In Mexico, I hope there's an opportunity with the new president in terms of their support of the Ukraine. I hope all these things come to bear, but there's a great opportunity. I'm glad we're having this hearing today to give us an opportunity to see what the Biden administration is doing and what opportunities are there for us to really have greater success right here in our own hemisphere. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to go to you, Secretary Nichols. I have a very specific question. Obviously, the work that we do here does affect very specific companies, very specific countries, very specific individuals. And the question that I want to start with affects a company that is also located in my community. They're dealing with Mexico. President Lopez Obrador threatening to essentially take over their port, their land in the Yucatan Peninsula. That's Vulcan Materials. Are you familiar with this as a situation? I think you are.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
You know, a little bit of overview on that. What could you say about that? What are you all doing to prevent this? What warning would you give this president on the way out as they're making this threat? What can you do about it? Happy to hear anything you have to say.
Thank you. This has been an issue for quite some time, as you know. We have raised our concerns with the government of Mexico at multiple levels.
Please don't gloss over those. Be specific about what those concerns are.
The security and reliability of investments under the framework of the USMCA is a matter of great interest to the United States. We have mechanisms to deal with dispute resolution under USMCA. We have met with the leadership of Vulcan multiple times to understand their concerns and their suggested way forward in this issue. Senior officials from multiple U.S. agencies have raised this with their counterparts in Mexico, and will continue.
What would be the
focused.
Mexican counterparts?
So the Secretary of Economy in Mexico, as well as their Navy Secretary, which controls the ports.
Conversations are fruitful or have borne no fruit? What would you say?
Well, again, we have had detailed conversations. I would say that certainly Mexican authorities understand our concerns, but we continue to talk about the way forward.
Do you have any message you'd like to deliver to the president of Mexico from this committee right now?
Well, I certainly think that those conversations are more productively held in private.
Okay, I appreciate it. I do have, since I have a little bit more time, I will go to a different line of questioning. Were you in your post when there was an authorization for, I want to say the number was about $20,000 for drag shows in Ecuador?
Yes, but that's not an issue that I worked on in any way.
Very good. I'm just, and I'm glad to hear that you weren't working on it. It saves you some headache of some questions, but I would be interested to know how many people do you think were a part of vetting that, signing off on that as a, creating the solicitation for it, authorizing the solicitation to go out, and then ultimately approving that solicitation and offering grants? How many people would you say were in that approval process?
So as I understand the process, it was done entirely at the post level. It was not a Washington process. It's worth remembering that this grant never actually took place. There was no show. There was nothing.
That's right. Political pressure forced it to be ended, no doubt. And thankfully, it would have been a waste of $20,000 of taxpayer money. But still, the question remains, how does that get through to approval? Because it did get to the point of approval. So how many people would you speculate at the post level had to put eyes on that in order for the solicitation, number one, to exist, and then number two, to be approved?
You know, it could be as few as 2 or 3 people. That for a small grant to be approved, and my colleagues manage money here, so they may have some insights into the broad process, not in the specific instance. But that's something you receive a proposal. It could be handled by local staff. Then even someone lower than a section chief, depending on the amount.
Did you look into it at all? Did you look into who it was?
This activity never took place and was canceled.
But did you look into who, from your position, did you look into who approved the solicitation and then who ultimately approved the grant?
Well, I talked to the chief of mission, and he told me that neither he nor the deputy chief of mission had ever seen anything about this, and it was a shock to them.
It was a shock, and so then there was a discussion about this. Who ultimately approved it? What was the title of the position that approved that?
I don't know the answer to that, sir.
Did you seek that information?
No, sir.
Do you believe that's important information for us to know?
I think that the important fact is that when it reached supervisory levels, didn't progress, didn't move forward for obvious reasons.
My time has expired. We're going to go to Ms. Manning for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank Chair McCall and Ranking Member Meeks and our witnesses for having this important hearing. Before we broke for votes, one of my colleagues objected vociferously to your suggestion that President Biden is working to address the problems at the border. And I'd like to point out that the Senate had a bipartisan border bill that had been negotiated fiercely, but they reached agreement on the bill. It would have provided serious solutions to the border issue, but unfortunately, former President Trump told Republicans in Congress that he would rather run on the border issue than solve that problem for the American people. So we never had a chance to vote on that border bill. I'd also like to mention that I am one of the original co-sponsors of the first bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill introduced in more than 10 years. It was introduced by one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Representative Salazar, along with Representative Escobar. I certainly wish that bill were supported by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, because that would address not only the border issues, but our other immigration issues. I'd like to ask Assistant Secretary Nichols, I'd like to ask you about an issue that has gotten some press recently, and that is a significant increase in migrants who are taking advantage of loose visa requirements in countries like Colombia and Nicaragua to transit to these countries by airplane and trying to get into the United States. And we've read reports that some of them are stuck in those airports, can't get out because they then can't get the flights they're trying to take to the U.S. It has caused enormous problems, but it's also a way for people to come to the U.S. illegally. So I wonder what the administration is doing to try to crack down on those flights by migrants and, frankly, by traffickers who are putting migrants on those flights. What is being done to get other countries to restrict this route?
We've worked with countries around the hemisphere, as well as ICAO and IATA, two key international aviation organizations, to crack down on charter flights that bring irregular migrants into our region. We meet with executives of commercial airlines to sensitize them to the risks of transporting non-bona fide travelers to our region. We have worked successfully with partners around the hemisphere to impose additional visa restrictions on countries that have a history of sending irregular migrants into our hemisphere. We've worked with partner nations to facilitate the repatriation of irregular migrants back to their countries of origin.
Are you seeing any success?
We are seeing success. The charter flight industry of irregular migrants has effectively ceased, and those migrants have tried to use commercial airliners or other means to access the region.
And can you tell me what impact the administration's regional processing centers or safe mobility offices has been having on migration from the region since they were established last year?
So the safe mobility offices have allowed people who wish to migrate to the United States to apply to do so through legal means, whether, for example, it's a work-related visas like the H-2 categories of visas, or other parole mechanisms to access those facilities away from our border. They can do so within the region, and it's prevented thousands and thousands of intending migrants from approaching the U.S. southwest border.
Thank you. Mr. Camilleri, can you talk a little bit about more details about the USAID programs to help support civil society in countries with entrenched autocratic regimes like Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua?
Certainly, Congresswoman, thank you for the important question. And in the limited time we have, just to say precisely in those countries where the regimes that govern those three countries are determined to squash and snuff out civic space, democratic space. USAID is committed to supporting those who champion democracy, free speech, ultimately free elections, and the ability of people in those countries to choose their own leaders and the path that their countries will take. In some places we're fairly lonely, like in Nicaragua, in championing and supporting that work under difficult circumstances, but it's something that we're very committed to.
My time is about to expire. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. The chair now recognizes Mr. Davidson if he is prepared.
I thank the chairman. I thank our witnesses. And, you know, when Secretary Blinken was here recently, I asked him about the Monroe Doctrine and when or whether it was a calculated decision by the United States to abandon that. And he seemed unfamiliar with the Monroe Doctrine. If I could just ask each of you, beginning, from your right to left, are you familiar with the Monroe Doctrine? Have you heard of this?
I am familiar with the Monroe Doctrine. I'm familiar with the Roosevelt Corollary as well.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
I am familiar with the Monroe Doctrine.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. So could you summarize it for me?
The Monroe Doctrine, the original Monroe Doctrine, states to European powers that they should not seek to reestablish their colonies in the Western Hemisphere. That is the original Monroe Doctrine.
And the Roosevelt Corollary, as you see it?
The Roosevelt Corollary broadens the Monroe Doctrine to tell foreign powers that they should not seek to establish a presence in the Western Hemisphere or to threaten the United States close to its borders.
So was it a calculated decision by the State Department to abandon that doctrine? And if so, when was that decision made?
There's no decision to eliminate the Monroe Doctrine.
Or the Roosevelt Corollary?
Or the Roosevelt Corollary.
Well, it's interesting that Secretary Blinken has no recollection of what those things mean. Hopefully he understands what the policy means, but if you look at the results, you would say, no, it seems like he kind of decided we're not actually going to do that anymore. I mean, the chairman started the hearing off by pointing out the results, so if we're still embracing those policies, how do you reconcile the results?
I think that we have worked intensively to strengthen our partners and allies in this hemisphere. We work with them on security, democracy, prosperity. The idea that
you're not doing anything to counter the other powers coming into the United States. I mean, frankly, it seems like the administration's more concerned about Pride Month activities in Guatemala than they are about China's presence all over the entire hemisphere. I mean, if you look at the agenda, if you look at the ambassadors and what they're emphasizing, and in Guatemala, speaking of that, the Secretary of State was just down there trying to get the Attorney General fired. Why is it an official policy of the United States to get the Attorney General of Guatemala fired?
The Attorney General of Guatemala, Consuelo Porras, is a sanctioned individual who has used her office to attack civil society, to attack anti-corruption crusaders, to go after public officials who have combated corruption. She has facilitated illicit activities in that country for years. She tried to obstruct the democratic process that took place with the election of Bernardo Arevalo. This is a person who has done a lot of very worrisome, very bad things.
So for that, that's why, is it an official State Department policy to revoke the travel privileges for members of the Guatemalan legislature if they don't support removing it? It sounds like there was a gathering where leverage was applied to Guatemala's legislature in order to coerce them into firing somebody that the Biden administration doesn't like. And frankly, I'll point out that wasn't the first time that Joe Biden was working to influence the firing of a prosecutor.
We believe that the Guatemalan people should have the right to be led by their democratically elected choice as president.
Do you believe it's fair for the the Biden administration, not the United States of America, but frankly the Biden administration, not acting on behalf of the interests of our country, to threaten the Guatemalan legislature?
What we have said is that those who use corrupt means, the payment of bribes, the threats of a wrongful prosecution against their own citizens to prevent a democratically elected leader from taking office, that is a threat to democracy.
Well, you know what's a threat to democracy and sovereignty is the invasion of our border. So I would love it if you were using the same kinds of leverage. If you're going to use leverage, use it on behalf of our country to defend America's border. Because instead, the Biden administration, with the help of our State Department, has facilitated an invasion of our country. So please focus on our sovereignty in our own country. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Chair now recognizes Mr. Castro for 5 minutes.
Assistant Secretary Robinson, where do the majority of firearms used by cartels in Mexico, Central America, or the Caribbean come from?
Thank you, sir, for that question. The majority of firearms used by criminals in the region come from the United States.
And would you say that U.S. gun laws are a foreign policy problem for the United States?
Well, what I would say is the countries in the region, our friends in the region, are challenged to oppose those transnational organizations, criminal organizations, and gangs who are receiving those weapons. And we are challenged here in the United States to help them.
And when countries in the region, particularly the Caribbean, raise their most important priorities with you, this is for Secretary Nichols, how often does the issue of firearms from the United States come up?
Comes up very frequently. We believe that the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was an important step in addressing those concerns. The naming of a special prosecutor in the Department of Justice to lead investigations, the use of technologies like E-Trace, training to partners in the Northern and Southern Caribbean in gun crime investigations has also been responsive to those concerns, but they would certainly, our partners would certainly like us to do even more.
And Secretary Robinson, one important tool we have to track and combat the trafficking of firearms is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms' E-Trace system, which allows law enforcement to submit forensic information from captured weapons like serial numbers to the database. Other countries can also participate and submit information, and many do, but there are significant gaps in coverage in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. The INL Bureau that you lead helps build capacity in foreign law enforcement agencies. What are you doing to help foreign law enforcement agencies participate in the E-Trace system and track the source of firearms?
Thank you. Actually, we are working very closely with our interagency colleagues at the Department of Justice, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and DHS to broaden the spectrum of the use of E-Trace, not just in Mexico, but in the Caribbean. I was just there. I was there with the special prosecutor, Michael Ben Avery, to discuss this with our colleagues in the Eastern Caribbean, and we're doing what we can to get more countries to enter the information and the evidence in E-Trace.
Well, thank you for that important work. And I raise this issue because we often talk about the very real danger of cartels and the damage that they do, not only in Mexico, but to Americans through the trafficking of fentanyl, trafficking of migrants, because they often force these people to pay a fee to present themselves at the border. But they are powered by American firearms. They would not be able to succeed the way they do but for the use of American firearms. And even though there's a lot of discussion about these issues on this committee, there is not the same will to actually do something about it and disarm the cartels. So there's a lot of, big statements and aggressive statements against the cartels, but actually very weak will to actually do anything about it, to disarm them so that they can accomplish what they're accomplishing now. I had a second unrelated question on Honduras for you all. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai has said that, quote, President Biden does not believe corporations should receive special tribunals and trade agreements that are not available to other organizations, and he opposes the ability of private corporations to attack labor, health, and environmental policies through investor-state dispute settlements. Does the State Department share the president's position of opposing investor-state dispute settlement policies?
Well, I'll just note that I support the president's policies. The specific reference to Honduras is not something that I've tracked closely, and I would appreciate the opportunity to come back to you for the record with a more specific answer.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. Chair now recognizes Mr. Baird for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I also appreciate our witnesses taking the time to share with this committee your perspectives. But my question deals, Mr. Assistant Secretary Nichols, the fact that I serve on a subcommittee for Foreign Affairs on the African subcommittee, and where we discuss a lot about the Chinese investments and how the U.S. can counter the Belt and Road Initiative. And in this case, and in this vein, I want to address China being right at our front doorsteps. Not only have we had the most illegal border crossings by Chinese nationals than we've ever seen, and China has a growing influence in Latin America. Some economists predict that the Chinese market for Latin America's exports could exceed $700 billion by 2035. And we now know that China is Latin America's top trading partner. So my question is this: if trade and investments between Latin America and China continue at this rate, what will the impact be on global ag markets and the U.S. ag exports? I serve on the Ag Committee as well. So I would appreciate your perspective in that regard.
Thank you, sir. The United States is the leading trading partner for 2/3 of the countries in this hemisphere, but we have to take the challenge seriously, and that means providing good options for countries around the hemisphere, whether it's through Development Finance Corporation, USAID, leveraging IDB lending and IDB Invest to provide access to the kinds of financing that countries need for major infrastructure projects. We're working in a whole host of areas to support agricultural trade and cooperation within the region. Foreign agricultural service officers play an important role in many of our embassies around the region in promoting U.S. agricultural exports to the hemisphere, and we believe that our products are the best in the world and can be transformative. We're working with countries as small as St. Kitts and Nevis and as big as Brazil to address the agricultural trade issues.
Thank you. And Mr. Camilleri, you have a considerable amount of experience with USAID, USAID, and being on the Ag Committee, that's of interest to me. So you have any insights that you would like to share, please?
Thank you, sir. Of course, through our Feed the Future programming, particularly in Guatemala and Honduras, we have strong interests in working with farmers and enhancing food security in many parts of the region. Maybe to your particular question about the link with PRC, you mentioned exports to the PRC, but I would also flag the Chinese exports to the region as well. And just mention in Honduras, for example, we've been able to work with smallholder farmers, many of them indigenous, connect them to the largest supermarket chain in the country that was sourcing 90% of its garlic, for example, from the PRC, and displace those imports with local produce from the farmers that we're supporting. And actually, the Mexican development agency, Amexseed, is also supporting in a partnership with USAID. So we're helping to kind of buttress and build more resilient food systems within the region for the region's own benefit, but also as a bank shot to building resilience against PRC influence.
would it also be your observation that this is successful and we're making progress in competing against the Belt and Road Initiative?
I think, as the Assistant Secretary mentioned, this is one of the defining strategic challenges of our time. It's not going anywhere. We need to stay at this and be present across the region. We have a four-pillar framework, USAID, that's a global framework that seeks to put forward our affirmative development model as part of the ground game in countering PRC influence. And so certainly we're making progress, but we're not left resting on our laurels.
Thank you. And I see my time's almost up, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Chair recognizes Mr. Connolly for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Assistant Secretary Nichols, a little while ago, one of my colleagues was praising the Attorney General of Guatemala. Is it not true that the Attorney General of Guatemala has in fact been sanctioned by the United States government for her interference in the peaceful transfer of power in Guatemala?
That's correct, sir.
She's been sanctioned.
He's under U.S. sanctions
Yeah.
for corruption and interfering with democratic processes.
Interfering with democratic process, right. That ought to be something sanctioned not only in Guatemala, but here in the United States. There's also been a lot of criticism thrown your way about allowing China to have influence in the region. In the previous administration, is it not true that President Trump cut off aid to Central America?
Certainly, there were reductions in assistance to a number of countries in our region proposed by.
But specifically in Central America because of then President Trump's concern about migration patterns. Is that not correct?
Well, certainly, that effort was undertaken, yes.
So there are three of the countries at that time in Central America who recognized Taiwan rather than the PRC. What happened during that administration to those three countries in terms of their recognition?
So Guatemala continues to recognize Taiwan. Honduras and El Salvador have changed their recognition to the PRC.
I see. Now, Brazil. Brazil was, under Bolsonaro, there was a warm relationship, reportedly, between President Trump and President Bolsonaro. And presumably that would take care of all Chinese influence in Brazil. So what happened to the pattern of, say, U.S. trade and Chinese trade in Brazil?
Certainly, if my memory serves, PRC investments in Brazil during that period increased. But I note that the United States continues to be the largest source of foreign direct investment in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm talking about trade. Yeah. And Brazil's trade with the United States in that time period, that very time period, fell 11%. Fell to the lowest level in 11 years, while Chinese trade and exports increased 34% during the Trump years. So when we're looking for efficacy in policies, it's easy to rhetorically rail against the influence of China, but if we're going to start to lay blame and look at records, let's start with the previous administration and how well that rhetoric and those policies and those relationships worked with respect to curbing Chinese influence in the region. From your point of view, do we need more or fewer resources to combat the competitive threat China poses to us in our own backyard?
We need more resources, sir.
More resources. Have you looked at what the Foreign Operations Appropriation Bill that's being marked up here in the House does to your budget and to that of the State Department and foreign diplomacy in general?
Our legislative affairs colleagues have briefed me on the contents. I have not seen the contents myself.
And let's say we're looking at 25, 30% cut in your resources. How would that help you counter the Chinese threat in the region?
That would be a devastating cut to our ability to post our people in the field, to provide assistance in ways that meaningfully make us more competitive in the region. We already face significant challenges staffing our posts. We don't have ambassadors in a number of countries.
But to put it simply, Mr. Assistant Secretary, deep cuts of that magnitude hardly help us in the competition with China. They will, in fact, impede our ability to do that. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Chair now recognizes Mr. Keene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Several months ago, reports revealed that Cubans are being recruited to fight for Russia in its illegal continued war of aggression against Ukraine. Has the administration determined that the Cuban regime has either allowed or promoted Cuban mercenaries to fight for Russia? And please explain Russia's current military, political, and economic relationship with Cuba.
So we have raised this issue with Cuban officials. I have raised it with my Cuban counterparts. The recruitment of Cubans is something that they expressed concern about. And the reports of that, I think, are worrisome to all of us. The Russian relationship with Cuba militarily continues to be an important relationship for them. And that's evidenced by the fact that Russian ships are visiting Cuba even as we speak.
Thank you. Last week, Claudia Sheinbaum was elected as Mexico's president and will be taking office in October. With new leadership in Mexico, what are the expectations for negotiations on measures to address and combat the production and trafficking of fentanyl in Mexico and combating it along the southern border?
Sir, thank you for that question. As you know, we have a very important relationship with Mexico in terms of trying to stop the flow of fentanyl from the border. We will have to see what happens when President-elect Sheinbaum takes office, but indications are that she takes security seriously. During her time as mayor of Mexico City, she increased budgets for the security apparatus in Mexico City significantly, I think something like 15%. That is a strong indication to us, at least, that she will take security seriously when she takes office. We will, of course, we are reaching out to her team now and look forward to working with her when she's inaugurated.
Her soon-to-be predecessor proved to be a difficult partner in assisting the United States in countering illegal migration stemming from Latin America and the violence of drug cartels. What are the strategies that you are using to counter the illegal migration and to address cartel violence that includes human trafficking?
Well, I can't speak to migration specifically, but what I will say is we have a very strong relationship with the security team in Mexico currently, and we expect we will have an even stronger relationship with the security team of the new president. We work very closely with the Secretariat of the Navy. We are training and equipping both at the federal level and at the state level. We have an excellent relationship working with our interagency partners at the Department of Justice with the Attorney General's office. All of those relationships are important, and we will keep working with them. We anticipate working with them with the new president.
And in an effort to counter the Kremlin's continued influence operations in Latin America, the State Department and OFAC have sanctioned entities such as the Social Design Agency, the SDA, These groups create campaigns containing pro-Kremlin propaganda to undermine support for Ukraine and promote anti-U.S. and anti-NATO sentiment. What strategies can the U.S. Department of State employ to effectively counteract the misinformation and propaganda campaigns orchestrated by influence for hire firms like the Social Design Agency in Latin America?
So note that through the Global Engagement Center, we seek to counter disinformation from Russia throughout the region. We inform partners of the sourcing. We carry out programs to educate journalists and civil society members about the true origins of the information that they receive. We point out the presence of malign entities like RT, Russia TV, Russia Today, in the region and how they seek to twist the narrative involved. We are continuing to promote training for journalists, for example, so that they can better identify the real sources of the information that's put before them.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keene. Chair now recognizes Mr. Sherman for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm pleased that we're having this hearing on the importance of Latin America, and that I would point out that as we work to secure America's national security and America's interests, that the proposed 11% cut in state and foreign ops budget will gut our efforts to be successful, particularly in Latin America. I want to focus on Haiti for a moment. The security and humanitarian situation in Haiti is dire. Gangs control 80% of Port-au-Prince, while nearly 1.5 million Haitians are facing famine. 362,000 people are internally displaced. We see young girls regularly the victim of sexual and gender-based violence. In short, gang violence has caused life in Haiti to be unbearable. However, for more than 6 months, Republicans have repeatedly put up obstacles. They're preventing the release of funds for the multinational security support mission. Mr. Nichols, does that hold on funding for that multinational security support system hurt our ability to stem the root causes of mass migration from Haiti?
Yes, sir. It is a serious concern.
And looking long-term, would the reauthorization of the Haiti Hope Help trade preferences help stabilize economic investment in Haiti? And how would that contribute to strengthening the opportunity for jobs and livelihoods?
It's crucial. We've already seen apparel and textile companies close up their operations in Haiti, and they have told us specifically that the reauthorization of Hope Help would give them the certainty that they need to continue in place. In that industry, orders come in 18 months ahead of time, so 2025 is now.
Obviously, the security situation and the need for that multinational security support system is critical. As putting that aside, is there other steps Congress can take to bolster private sector investment in Haiti?
Certainly, among the things that are important, beyond trade preferences contained in Hope and Help, increasing security. That is the number one concern that investors cite in their inability to operate in Haiti is the security situation.
That's, I think, obvious to anybody who sees what's going on there. Obviously, we're focusing on fentanyl. 110,000 Americans died from drug overdoses last year. China has been the primary source of precursor chemicals synthesized into fentanyl in Mexico. If China were to stop providing those precursor chemicals, are they easy for the drug cartels to get from some other source, or would that significantly dent their ability to bring fentanyl into my city?
Thank you, sir, for that question. The short answer is it's complicated because some of the chemicals are dual use chemicals, so they have legal uses. What we continue to ask of the PRC is that they do a better job of
If
figuring
we
out.
were successful with the PRC, would that, I think I have another 30 seconds. Oh, the clock is wrong. I'll ask you to respond for the record as to whether, if China were successful in stopping those chemicals, whether the drug cartels could get them from some other source.
Potentially, yes.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Guam is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say it's a pleasure to join the committee, the prestigious committee, and it's a vital part that it plays for our nation. And I'm looking forward to working with all my members here. Now, while my district lies within the Indo-Pacific, the Western Hemisphere and the Pacific share many of the same issues. Guam's proximity to the People's Republic of China means that great power competition by aggressive nations affects us on a daily basis. So the Western Hemisphere, Latin America, and the Caribbean are no different. And additionally, larger operations like Russia, flag to convenience shipping, and the PRC's One Belt, One Road initiative means that these nations can negatively influence every region of the world. So Assistant Secretary Robinson, illegal, unregulated, and unrestricted fishing is a problem that affects population globally. And both in the Americas and the Indo-Pacific, IUU fishing is used as an irregular tool by the People's Republic of China. Yet, despite initiatives of the Maritime Safe, this program continues to proliferate across the globe. So Assistant Secretary Robinson, how is the Department of State changing its approach to counter the ongoing threat more effectively?
Thank you for that question. I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a global issue that requires all of our partner nations to be involved in defending against. We're working very closely, for instance, with Panama, with Ecuador, with other countries in the Eastern Caribbean to give them the ability and the capacity to have a better awareness of their domain, territorial domain, to identify these illegal fleets and to work with us, partner with us, to combat them and to raise these issues with the PRC.
I appreciate that. I just like to see more U.S. ships interest out there to deter CCP. Also, another question for you, sir. Chemicals essential to creating fentanyl or other drugs are often given to Latin America-based transnational criminal organizations, TCO, from actors within the People's Republic of China. So, Assistant Secretary Robinson, how have external state actors like PRC disrupt state operations in this field and damage the region as a whole?
Well, while I would tweak that a little bit, because we don't have evidence that the PRC is, as a government, is allowing these chemicals to go to transnational criminal organizations. We do know that there are industries in the PRC that are selling these chemicals to and trafficking these chemicals to transnational criminal organizations. That is without a doubt. We are working with our partners. We're working at a global level to identify both the companies and the networks and working with them to bring them down.
Okay, and if you need help from this committee, I'm more than happy to work with you to expedite this process because it's killing America, basically.
Thank you, sir.
Finally, just a minute here. Since taking office, President Lula da Silva has aggressively sought to deepen Brazil's ties with China. And China is Brazil's largest trading partner and invested so much money. And basically, they're going to China and asking for help with critical infrastructure, railways, energy, port, and all their projects. So CCP is basically buying them up. So what are we doing to prevent this?
We have robust engagement with Brazil across a whole host of areas. The United States works with our private sector to promote trade and investment. The AmCham in Brazil members account for about 2/3 of the value of Brazilian GDP. We work with Brazilian officials to try and remove barriers to our commercial relations, and we seek to leverage the tools that we have, whether it's EXIM, DFC, USAID, Inter-American Development Bank, so that U.S. businesses will be competitive in competing for infrastructure and other major projects in Brazil.
All right, thank you for that. I ran out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Western Hemisphere, it is ripe for nearshoring, moving our supply lines closer to the United States market, and this is our moment to act. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that we need to diversify our supply chains and bring them closer to the United States market. For national security reasons, we can't rely on China to produce critical technology. For economic reasons, we should encourage businesses to continue moving to the Western Hemisphere after seeing pandemic shortages. And for common sense reasons, we should work to multiply the impact of our historic investments here at home, including the CHIPS Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, by creating regional ecosystems. Mexico has always been Arizona's #1 trading partner. Now they are the #1 trading partner of the entire United States. And the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which has been pivotal on both sides of the border, will be up for review in 2026. We should be gearing up for this by seizing this moment to make investments, to encourage our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean to make investments and to strengthen ties with our neighbors. This should include investments in the semiconductor supply chain, particularly the upstream parts, including critical mineral mining and processing, and downstream parts like testing and packaging. On the upstream side, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, and others have large deposits of minerals that are critical for making semiconductors. Building industries that mine and processes those minerals would make them formidable players. On the downstream side, Intel already has an assembly and testing facility in Costa Rica, and states in northern Mexico have expressed deep interest in getting involved as well. In fact, 2 schools in my district, Arizona State University and Mesa Community College, are working with the Department of Commerce to train Mexican students for the semiconductor workforce. My push is that we use all of our tools, our schools, universities, Development Finance Corporation, the State Department's International Technology Security Innovation Fund, and our historic investment in the CHIPS and Science Act to shore up national security, diversify our supply chain, develop stable jobs in Latin America, and create a regional semiconductor ecosystem. Assistant Secretary Nichols, Mexico has lots of work to do to address nearshoring challenges. It needs to open up its energy policy and rein in the cartels. How should the United States encourage President-elect Sheinbaum to tackle such obstacles to nearshoring investment?
Well, first of all, let me just wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said. And with regard to Mexico, Mexico is one of the leading recipients of foreign direct investment in the world, particularly in northern Mexico. President-elect Sheinbaum is a scientist. He worked for the department in one of the labs of the U.S. Department of Energy, and I think demonstrating to her with the hard facts the importance of these issues and laying out the scientific case will be compelling for her.
I have another question for you, Assistant Secretary Nichols. On Monday, President-elect Sheinbaum spoke about the AMLO proposed judicial overhaul that could upset the balance of power in Mexico and create market unrest. How do you anticipate that Mexico's recent election and the proposed judicial changes will affect American treatment in Mexico?
Well, obviously, Mexico is a sovereign country, and they have procedures that they can use to change their legal framework. We believe that judicial transparency is vital for all investors, whether they're domestic Mexican investors or international investors, particularly those from the United States and Canada, as USMCA partners. We will continue to insist, whatever the future legal regime is in Mexico, that all the signatories to USMCA respect the protection of foreign investment provisions in that agreement.
Thank you. And I recently introduced H.R. 8414, the Semiconductor Supply Chain Security and Diversification Act, a bipartisan bill which directs the Development Finance Corporation to invest in parts of the semiconductor supply chain in the Western Hemisphere, regardless of income classification. Assistant Secretary Nichols, beyond investments from the Development Finance Corporation, how should we be working with other Latin America and Caribbean governments to attract nearshoring opportunities, particularly the critical mineral processing or testing and packaging operations to build a robust regional supply chain?
Undersecretary Jose Fernandez has been leading our efforts around critical minerals in the region, bringing countries into the supply chain, securing those assets for the mutual benefit of our partners around the hemisphere. We've seen already investments, as I referred to in my opening statement, in Costa Rica,
The gentleman's
for example.
time has expired.
So we'll continue to work on that.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman has yielded back. The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Salazar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you, all of you, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Nichols. Mr. Nichols, we saw each other in El Salvador a couple of days ago. Wonderful to have seen you there for the second inaugural of President Bukele. Salvador was the murder capital of the world at one point, and now is the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. Not bad. But you know that Bukele was not one of your favorites. What did he do right?
President Bukele and his government have implemented a comprehensive rule of law programming. The frontal effort to control the gangs in El Salvador is impressive and something that many countries are watching with great interest. We are concerned, however, that such policy should include a respect for the rule of law and the opportunity for all citizens to receive due process.
Of course, I was the first one who told him we do not want anyone who's innocent in jail. Right? You agree with me, but do you still agree that they did a great job? And even the State Department is saying, okay, well, maybe we should copy this.
Well, I think that we can help countries implement policies that address crime and still respect the rule of law and human rights.
No doubt about it. I'm sure they want that too. All right, so I only have 5 minutes, so I have to move to the other one. Let's go to Cuba. The newest economic policy allows Cubans to use our banks, the United States banks, to transfer money anywhere around the world, supposedly for trade purposes. And I have no doubt that the Biden administration had the most noble interest in helping the Cuban people. But we know the Cuban regime. And you know what could happen? One of the problems is that, let's say that the regime forms a company and it disguises in a company that is selling, or I'm sorry, is buying tomatoes from Turkey. All right, so Cuban company buys tomatoes from Turkey, and in reality, what they're doing is laundering money for Hezbollah. Our banking system doesn't need to know this. You know that's a possibility. So what do you think haven't you thought about this?
So the regulations that we have put in place will help thousands of independent Cuban businesses.
Yeah.
The individuals who participate are screened. The participation of Cuban government officials is specifically prohibited.
No, but wait a minute. The Cubans are intelligent, and they're going to find Pepe or Berta, and they're going to say, hey, come on, you're going to put together this little trade, this little business, and we're going to be selling tomatoes to Turkey. And in reality, they're behind it, because that's what they do. We don't do that, but they do. So my only question is, what can we really do in order to prevent that? Because we don't want the Cubans to be using the United States banking system to launder money and to help our enemies. Do you understand that that's a possibility?
Certainly that the United States financial system continues to have compliance requirements and know your customer requirements. They screen their customers very carefully, and we will work with the financial system to ensure that there are measures in place to prevent those types of things.
And don't
from
you think that maybe when it comes to the Cubans, we should implement even more layers because of their intentions?
The goal is to promote private sector development in
I
Cuba.
am sure, but that's not the goal of the regime. You know, the regime doesn't care if people eat. They're in the business of power. But hey, we'll work together on that. Now, Mr. Robinson, wonderful to talk to you. You know, my time is running out. Guatemala. Guatemala, we have a situation in Guatemala with a lady by the name of Consuelo Porras. The State Department has Porras in the crosshairs. I don't know her, I've never seen her, I've never spoken with her. She's the AG of Guatemala, right? And the president appointed her. And now she's sanctioned by the United States. And while you were ambassador, Mr. Robinson, she kicked out something called the CICIG because according to the Guatemalans, it was politicized. We may think that they're a bunch of banana republics, and some of them are, and I have called them out on it, but you know, they have the right to name whomever they want to as AG. And we don't have the right to say, oh, you're gonna name Maria, but not Rosa. So my question is, has she done anything right?
Just a point of clarification, CICIG was kicked out after I left Guatemala.
No, I understand, but the State Department doesn't like her one bit, and she's been sanctioned. So I just, you know, what has she done anything right? Why are we persecuting this lady?
She has been sanctioned for undermining democratic institutions and the free and fair election, attempting to undermine the free and fair election in Guatemala.
But you know how many people in Latin America have done that and they have
expired.
not been sanctioned, like the president of Argentina, the president of Ecuador. I mean, we have a lot of people who've done that, but
Gentlewoman's
why
time
her
has
in
expired.
particular?
Would you please answer her question in writing, please? And the gentlewoman, time has expired.
Yeah.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Camilleri and Assistant Secretary Robinson for being here today, and Assistant Secretary Nichols. It's a point of personal privilege. It's always great to see another Rhode Islander and certainly a fellow Quaker, Moses Brown Quaker, here today. As we all know and have covered today, the Western Hemisphere faces complex and interconnected challenges, whether it's regional violence and corruption, climate change and food insecurity, or the issue of regional mass migration. Because of this, the State Department and USAID have a responsibility to engage with partners and allies as we work to increase security and stability in our own backyard. Full funding of this work has never been more vital. One area where the State Department has a proven track record is its support of democracies in the Americas that are working to fight corruption. Returning to the topic of Guatemala, now President Arevalo ran on a platform of anti-corruption during the tumultuous 2023 election. Yet, despite his landslide victory, President Arevalo is now facing serious challenges to his anti-corruption policies from the Attorney General Porras. Assistant Secretary Nichols, how is the State Department supporting Guatemala's anti-corruption efforts? And specifically, how would the funding cuts proposed by Republicans affect your ability to continue the work in Guatemala to eradicate public corruption?
Thank you, Mr. Amo. And as our staff said, agreed, I do have a hard stop because I have to get on a plane and give the commencement address at our alma mater in Providence, Rhode Island. But let me just briefly address your question. We are working with the government of Guatemala on comprehensive reforms that will promote private sector investment, address a lack of development in the highlands of Guatemala where most irregular migrants originate from, putting in place structures that will prevent corrupt activities within the various institutions of the state and strengthening the justice and law enforcement sectors. The resources that we receive are crucial to that effort. The largest sender of irregular migrants in Central America is Guatemala, and we have to work with them across a whole host of areas to strengthen their capabilities.
Given the time constraints, I'll yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your participation. Hope your speech goes well. Hope it's memorable. And I hope you'll respond promptly to the questions the committee submits to you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Nichols' questions are going to go to you now, Mr. Robinson, so get ready for that and enjoy it. And
I'll answer what I can.
yes, thank you. 8 men from Tajikistan with ties to ISIS were arrested over the weekend in New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles by personnel by ICE, in addition to reporting claims that 6 of these 8 are Russian nationals. Are you familiar with this case?
I read about it either yesterday or this morning.
Okay, but you are the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, well, all 8 of these men crossed the border through the southern border. Their criminal background checks reportedly returned clean when they crossed into the U.S. At least 2 of the men crossed the border in the spring of 2023, and one of them used a CBP One app, which the Biden administration created to allow migrants to book appointments to claim asylum, but has been abused to expedite mass importation of illegal aliens who come to the U.S. for economic or mischievous opportunities rather than credible fear on asylum. My Republican colleagues and I have been sounding the alarm about this for over a year. Some 300 people on the terror watch list have crossed the border. We've had 1.7 million known, quote unquote, gotaways. So Director Wray says this is one of the most serious concerns he has about the potential for really potentially terror attacks. How are the Tajiki and Russian nationals arriving in Central and South America to begin with? Do you have any information on that? It's connected. It's clearly connected also to your migration job on drug trafficking. So what are your views on that?
Right. Honestly, I'd have to defer to my colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security.
What steps does the State Department take to intervene before foreign adversaries like this arrive at our southern border and granted admission into the country?
Well, we work very closely with our partners in the region, Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru.
Is it fair to say that the 300 people that have been caught on the terror watch list, these are the ones caught, not the ones not caught, have flown to Mexico more than likely from a third country?
Honestly, I can't answer that.
So, but you can say you're working with the country of Mexico and other countries in the region to identify potential people that are in drug trafficking or have an adversarial interest in the region. So the question is, what about that? What is Mexico telling you about people who have flown into their country that are on the terror watch list?
Again,
or a no-fly list?
Again, I would have to defer to my colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security. But what I will say is we have a very close working relationship with Mexican authorities on issues such as migration, transnational organized crime, and corruption. We continue to work very closely with them. We look forward to working closely with them with the new president.
Well, I'm going to submit my questions for the record because I'm not going to be able to get the answers to my questions, and therefore I'll yield the time back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
No.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized. Pardon me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I do think it's ironic that we're discussing the need to counter PRC influence in the Western Hemisphere when my Republican colleagues are seeking to slash the international affairs budget by a devastating 11%. And these drastic cuts will lead to U.S. absence in Latin America and the Caribbean, a region that already gets less attention and resources than it deserves. I recently came back from a trip to Brazil, and it was focused on JPER. A number of very critical discussions came out of that trip. So Acting Assistant Administrator Camilleri, I was concerned to hear reports of forced conversions, and religious discrimination against groups that practice African-based religions in Brazil. Does USAID view the protection of these groups' cultural heritage and tradition as linked to better development outcomes?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Certainly, we would. Our programming in Brazil, as you probably heard, is quite limited to the environmental area, some cooperation on health, as well as on migration management and supporting the integration efforts of the Brazilian government. So we wouldn't have programming specifically in that area, but I think we could associate ourselves with your concern.
So how do you manage sort of localized resources and support and infrastructure across the Western Hemisphere? I would imagine that it should not warrant a one-size-fits-all model, but please share, because I've heard that that's not happening.
This is a priority for us globally. Administrative Power has set ambitious targets for localizing USAID's effort. As you said, it's not easy, and it can't be one size fits all. Within the Western Hemisphere, we've actually been at the tip of the spear in some ways in this effort in Central America with an initiative called Centroamérica Local. And to give you a sense of the progress we've made in fiscal year 2020, 3% of our funding in Central America went directly to local organizations. In the last fiscal year, that was up to 21%, and we have a global target of 25%, which we expect to meet in the next year or two in Central America. We've made, I think, substantial progress in some other areas of the region, Paraguay being perhaps the best example. In other places, there's more work to do, but this is, again, a global priority and one that Administrator Power has placed a premium on.
I just want to say, if the framework model shouldn't be the same for each country, the measurables and the metrics also should not be the same, because there are different countries, there's different kinds of collaboration, there's different kinds of capacity, et cetera. So please take that back. Assistant Secretary Robinson, how does U.S. contributions to the Amazon Fund help counter the deforestation caused by criminal actors engaged in illegal mining practices?
Well, I don't know the specifics of the fund, but I will say illegal mining is among our concerns in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. We know that transnational organized criminals are expanding on what they are illegally moving through the hemisphere. Illegal mining is among those things. Arms, other environmental crimes are of great concern. And for instance, we are working very closely both in Ecuador and Colombia to offer capacity building and training to their police specifically on the issue of environmental crimes.
And they're also smuggling out, killing habitation and smuggling out animals that are coming into this country that they shouldn't be. There was a question about Mexico, obviously a new election. So want to know how you plan to engage with this new administration, especially concerning risks around the militarization of a governing approach.
Well, first of all, we've already begun engaging with the incoming administration through our embassy and through Assistant Secretary Nichols' office. We will continue to engage and raise the issues of security as we have with the previous government.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Now we turn to the chairwoman of the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, Young Kim of California, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for staying late to answer all of our questions. You know, I recently came back from a CODEL to Taiwan, and in all of our engagements, there was a constant theme of the Chinese Communist Party ramping up pressure on Taiwan's bilateral partners throughout the region and throughout the world into switching their diplomatic recognition to the CCP. As you know, when President Tsai started her term 5 years ago, Taiwan had 22 partners. As President Lai is starting his new term, he's working with only 12 partners around the world in the region. So since 2017, 5 countries in Latin America have cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan and established official diplomatic relations with the CCP. So can you talk about some of those CCP pressure tactics in the region? What are you seeing? Mr. Camilleri, you want to start?
Sure. I think we saw an example of this just in the last few days with some Guatemalan exports being rejected from the PRC. So clearly economic coercion is one of the forms of pressure that's being brought on countries that are committed to continuing to recognize Taiwan. I had the opportunity to accompany Secretary Blinken recently to Guatemala for a really productive bilateral conversation with President Arevalo and his team. And President Arevalo conveyed his commitment, his government's commitment to maintain the recognition of Taiwan. But I think we see very, very clearly and very transparently the kind of pressure that's being brought against such governments. We have, I think, some tools that we can bring to bear on this in terms of
what are some
helping
of the
our
tools
partners.
that you're talking about?
Pardon me?
What are some of the tools?
So I think just to name a couple, certainly in the procurement space where we've seen PRC very focused on major infrastructure, for example, often using corruption, often not respecting local environmental and labor standards, oftentimes with pretty shoddy results in terms of the infrastructure that's built. Bringing awareness to what that track record looks like, building international standards into procurement processes. We've done this very successfully in the Dominican Republic, for example, in the Port of Manzanillo, by working with the Army Corps of Engineers to build those international standards into procurement processes so that U.S. consortia were able to win contracts where PRC companies had been well-placed to do so. That's one of the ways in which we can build up both awareness and provide alternatives to countries that want to partner with us as the preferred partner, but we need to put those alternative options on the table for them.
Our words needs to follow with our actions too. So thank you for that. I also want to ask about the CCP, which is making large-scale investments in cultural programming throughout the hemispheres. For example, there are over 40 CCP Confucius Institutes throughout Latin America. And CCP and Latin American universities are participating in joint research and exchange programs. So can you talk about USAID's work and programming to counter such soft power influence in the region?
Sure. I think broadly speaking, our affirmative development model is our competitive advantage in the region. We are not saddling countries with debt. We are not looking to bring in our own workers. We are genuinely partnering in a transparent, a rules-based manner, looking to move them ultimately from aid to trade. We want our partners to prosper. We don't want them to be beholden to us and saddled with predatory lending.
Let me ask one question to Assistant Secretary Robinson, because we know that CCP plays a major role in the global fentanyl supply chain, and Chinese brokers intentionally sell precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels who then produce and smuggle fentanyl into the United States. So can you talk about how State Department is engaging our allies and partners in the region to ensure they take CCP drug trafficking very seriously?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
And also maybe you can talk about the so-called fentanyl working group that U.S. and China established late last year in November.
Absolutely. I will be very quick. I've had 4 opportunities to speak directly with my PRC counterparts, twice in Beijing, once in Vienna. The Global Coalition Against Synthetic Drugs is our broader effort to engage with countries around the world on this issue. over 150 countries, over 15 international organizations involved.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Please, if you'd like to finish your answer in writing, that would be helpful to the gentlewoman from California. Ms. Titus of Nevada is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you're talking about the influence of China and our competition with China, I would ask you that doesn't our policy, if it follows President Trump's maximum pressure, like in Cuba, drive some of these countries into the arms of China as opposed to our wanting to do more foreign aid or more investment or a more cooperative approach work better to compete with China than to just cut things off and push them in that direction?
Well, I'm not a China expert, but we do deal with China a lot, compete with China a lot around the world. I would say our competitive advantage, as mentioned by my colleague Michael, is that what we do around the world with our partners is transparent and above board and doesn't involve predatory lending practices. And so as we deal with our partners around the world and expose them to what we're offering and how we're offering it by partnering with them, as opposed to China, we think that we have a better product to sell.
I think so too, but if you can't just look at this from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of politics involved in this, and depending on the administration, depends on how much you are actually engaged in the process that you describe. But okay, I appreciate that. Earlier in the hearing, my Republican colleague from Florida once again got on his rant and attacking the LGBTQ community. This is nothing new. The Republicans have been trying to marginalize this community for every turn this Congress. Yet we're the beacon for human rights here in the United States, and we ought to push for that. Our foreign policy should reflect that, should reflect respect for other communities, protect human rights around the world. Mr. Camilleri, would you address why you think it might be a better way to do policy to include all these communities? There was a little chance to discuss it earlier, but I don't think it came out very strongly.
Yeah, I think these things are actually linked, which is to say part of our competitive advantage over countries like the PRC is precisely that we bring American values to bear on the way that we operate. And fundamental to those American values is a belief in democracy and a belief in fundamental human rights. And of course, LGBTQ plus rights are human rights.
Well, we've seen democracy backsliding in a lot of parts of the world, a lot of legislation being passed that attacks this community kind of in particular. How does the State Department try to counter that or deal with those kind of policies in countries where we want to have better relations?
I think the question may have been for the State Department, so I'll let the Assistant Secretary weigh in if he likes to. But from the USAID standpoint, we are in many places supporting advocates to engage their governments on behalf of equality and dignity for all populations, as well as using our own kind of diplomatic relationships to advocate directly for, again, respect for universal human rights.
You know, I serve on the House Democracy Partnership. Guatemala is one of the countries that we have a partnership with. Peru, we're working on. And so I've seen y'all's work in supporting some NGOs, supporting the drafting of some legislation. Could you address that? Is that not a way to also deal with this in a more specific kind of answer?
Yeah, that's precisely, thank you, Congressman, that's precisely the kind of work that in some places we're able to partner with civil society to do, which is to engage, for example, with their legislatures or with their court systems. And we've seen some encouraging decisions from courts in the region that are more protective of fundamental equality. And so where we're able to, we can partner with NGOs, with civil society organizations, in some cases directly with governments that are committed to expanding protections for the LGBT community, which in many parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, unfortunately, is subject not just to discrimination, but significant violence in order to provide those protections.
I would just add that the same goes for security, which is where my perspective is. We're working to make sure that police departments, for instance, both at the federal and state level, are protecting all members of society, marginalized communities, indigenous communities, LGBTQ communities as well.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Secretary Robinson, I'll ask you first because I know you're very kindly staying over your departure time, and I appreciate that. Obviously, there's been a rise in narcotics coming into this country, but there's also a rise in narcotics affecting countries in the Western Hemisphere. Can you give me your best prognosis on whether it's Mexico or the return of drugs to Colombia and so on, what the likely effect is if we cannot reverse that trend in those countries of drugs often intended for us, but they also get consumed in the countries in which they pass through?
No, absolutely, it's a threat, and I would say, frankly, the Office of National Drug Control Policy has better statistics and more expertise, but both of those countries have reached out to ONDCP about the rise in local usage of narcotics and synthetic drugs. And this is happening around the world. We get it from our partners in Europe and Asia as well.
So I just want to ask a leading question, if you can indulge me. Would you say, from your experience and from the experience of the State Department, that one of the kindest things we can do is have a strict enforcement policy both here at our border and in cooperation with these countries? Because if we don't, we're not just causing drugs to come into the United States, but we are in fact affecting this very stability of these countries, most of them to our south.
Well, number one, I think it's incumbent upon every country to secure their borders. But what we want to do is strike a balance, right? We want to make sure that we're stopping the bad things that are coming in, but allowing trade, allowing the free flow of investment. And that's a little tricky. That's why I think it's good that we work with the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice and have an interagency team that is looking at all of the different aspects of this so that we can address this issue.
Well, I'll just share with you, I have the busiest land border in the world there in San Diego. And if it were not for the incredible amount of drugs coming over that land border, if it were not for all the procedures and the delays that are caused by that, even with the most effective and efficient modern technology, some of which are sniffing dogs, but we would in fact be able to run that port with a third or half as many actual lanes. There's no question at all that drugs and to a certain extent human smuggling make a huge difference in our effectiveness. Thank you, and I may have more questions for the record, but I wanted to thank you for remaining. Administrator, I want to ask you sort of, you've been on the job, I know you're acting, but you've been on the job and in the area long enough to see the effects of a number of administrations in years of USAID. Under the Trump administration, there was an attempt to dramatically consolidate some portions of our foreign aid and investment. Some was consolidated, some wasn't. I happened to be during that time at TDA, so it was one of the small agencies that wasn't. From your perspective, are you better off with a multitude of small agencies and agencies that sometimes even compete, sometimes coordinate? And that would include, of course, the Ex-Im Bank and others, Millennium Challenge. Or, in fact, should this committee continue to look at a direction toward competing against China and other, quote, aid producers that aren't always aid deliverers, to have a more, if you will, coordinated attempt? And I know that's a broad question, but it's one that I think we need to look at that we created the Millennium Challenge. We've created each of those agencies. This committee was responsible for making TDA an independent agency back in the 90s. We did it all for good reason, but is that still clearly an impediment when you have to run to Commerce and run to a lot of places to try to put together your programs?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a big question, maybe slightly above my pay grade, but I appreciate it.
But you don't have to comment on the DOD part of it. I'll leave that part alone at least.
All right. You'll keep me out of trouble. I think what I'd say is you use the word coordination, and that ultimately is critical, because what you've provided us is across the interagency with a broad set of tools. And maybe the most recent one being a pretty powerful one in the DFC. We have seen that when we bring that full toolkit to bear, we can be very effective. Ecuador has come up here today as a place that's facing some really significant challenges, that has both the prior government and this one a strong interest in partnering with us to meet those challenges. DFC has actually responded in a big way in Ecuador. I think it's per capita the biggest market now for the Development Finance Corporation. So that, in combination with what USAID doing, what INL is doing, I think is a good example of when we bring those various tools to bear on a specific challenge and opportunity in terms of that bilateral relationship, how we can be effective. But I think, to your point, that the challenge for us in the administration is making sure that we are coordinating among those various tools.
So I'm going to close with just one question for you. Not to say that we need to create yet another hat somewhere in some agency or above an agency, but should there be a single point of contact reporting, if you will, to the president for coordinating, for competing, because some of your activities, obviously you're not in the State Department, even though you partner with them. You're not in Treasury, even though you partner with them. You're not in Commerce, even though, and the list goes on. Is in fact that question of who above your pay grade could ensure that cooperation doesn't just occur sometimes, but occurs all the time?
I think I would say, and the Assistant Secretary may have reflections on this as well, based on his tenure. We see each other a lot.
I know you try. I'm not for a moment doubting the effort. I just was asking the question, and maybe for the Assistant Secretary that would be a good question. Can we do it better?
Well, I would absolutely agree with you that we should always be asking the question, can we do it better? It's, again, tricky, right? Because all of our authorities are different and the way we get money is different. That's why the coordinating...
Even the color of how you can spend it is different.
Exactly. And so that's why the coordinating responsibility of the NSC is so important, making sure that we all get together to hash these things out. As Michael said, we spend a lot of time together anyway, but could we do it better and more effectively? Absolutely.
Okay, well, in closing, if you wouldn't mind opining with further thoughts, either without questions, or I'll be happy to add additional questions, but it is an area where I think for the long-term good of this committee, we need to look and say, can we provide ability for you to do it better, which might include changing, if you will, the color of money, the authorities, coordination, and so on. I'm not on the Armed Services Committee, but I hear from them often their strengths and weaknesses, because they can spend money differently than you. And with that, I want to thank all of the witnesses for their valuable testimony. Members will have their questions submitted. We would ask that you be willing if you receive them within 5 legislative days, to respond promptly. The committee, pursuant to the committee rules, all members will have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous material for the record, subject to the length limitations, and without objection, that is ordered, and we stand adjourned.